Well, let's stay with this story. U.S. President Donald Trump's administration has ordered the permanent halting of HIV funding to South Africa. It follows an initial 90-day freeze, which was later reversed for life-saving programs. Let's get more detail now on this, and we speak to our senior Washington correspondent, Simon Marks. Simon, good evening to you, our time, and it's good to have you with us. The AfriForum, can I start there? The President, Cyril Ramaphosa, says that we should solve our problems here at home instead of running to other countries. Are we any clear today as to who members of the AfriForum met in Washington?
Well, they say they met senior officials at the White House. It's pretty clear that they did not, as far as we know, see President Donald Trump. We do not know whether they met Elon Musk, nor indeed whether Elon Musk played any role in securing access to the building for that delegation. But as to precisely who they met, there's no transparency over that, certainly from the White House side. Indeed, the White House has remained mum on the visit that took place earlier this week. There is no question, though, that this was a successful effort by that delegation from AfriForum, Solidarity Movement and Solidarity to steal a bit of a march on government. Because remember that while President Ramaphosa is saying that people should stay at home to solve problems, he himself had indicated that he was going to send a delegation from the government to Washington, D.C. to meet with senior figures inside the White House, within the State Department and the Trump administration, and presumably up on Capitol Hill as well, in a bid to put South Africa's side of the story and to push back at the disinformation that Secretary of State Marco Rubio and President Trump himself have promulgated. They both have claimed that the Expropriation Act is already leading to the seizure of farms held by Afrikaners without compensation. It's not something that the US government has said might happen in the future. They say it's something that is taking place now. That's one of several reasons why President Trump has been diminishing the relationship between Washington, D.C. and Pretoria. So government wanted to send a delegation here itself to try and correct the record. That delegation has not been in Washington, D.C. It hasn't been announced. It hasn't been formalized. We know that the South African Embassy and DIRCO was finding it reportedly difficult to make contacts with senior figures inside the Trump administration. And, you know, the AfriForum delegation clearly had an in at the White House. And it's been very apparent that there are voices close to President Trump's ear who have been telling him that he needs to take the situation regarding South Africa's foreign policy and the Expropriation Act seriously, and putting pressure on President Ramaphosa. I think it's just worth underscoring, Golly, that that delegation here did say that they thought that the United States should not be revoking South Africa's trading privileges under AGOA. They urged the White House to engage in other pressure tactics on President Ramaphosa and government, because, of course, there are some Republicans on Capitol Hill saying revoke the AGOA privileges and go even further and suspend diplomatic ties between the two countries.
Simon, today, South Africans waking up to the news that the U.S. has now cut funding for HIV/AIDS-related programs permanently. Is it pure coincidence that this is happening at the same time that AfriForum and Solidarity were in the US?
Well, it's not coincidence. It's an example of how rapidly things are moving in a city where events have become very unpredictable. I think it is more likely that after the US Supreme Court last night told President Trump that he could go ahead and freeze all of those programs internationally. That was the first decision pertaining to this new Trump administration that has come before the United States Supreme Court for a ruling. That then resulted immediately in programs all over the world receiving the emails that so many groups in South Africa received, saying the funding is no longer, as the emails put it, aligned with American national priorities. But there is some surprise in all of this, because the Trump administration, the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, State Department officials had indicated that PEPFAR was going to be carved out of this determination to shutter the U.S. Agency for International Development. Remember that PEPFAR was the creation of President George W. Bush when he was in the White House and wanted to do more to help Africa generally and South Africa particularly deal with the HIV/AIDS crisis. And so behind the scenes, Bush-era Republicans said that they believed that this PEPFAR funding was going to be safe. What we've now all realized over the last few hours is that even the PEPFAR funding is not sacred as far as the Secretary of State Marco Rubio, now presiding over the skeleton of USAID, is concerned. So there's a shock in the fact that these letters were sent out, but they absolutely herald the beginning of the end for US funding in South Africa on a range of different assistance and development projects. And it would be very interesting to know what President George W. Bush down in Dallas in Texas is making of the decision to send those letters out and disappoint so many groups across South Africa and undermine the work that those groups have been doing with US funding.
Yeah, I wonder what the former president indeed must be thinking at this time. George W. Bush, thank you very much for that update. Our senior Washington correspondent, Simon Marks.